opening words this morning. Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday, far into the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer.
Please join us for our opening hymn this morning. It's number 347 in this hymnal with the Transylvanian cover, Gather the Spirit. Can remain standing if that is comfortable for you for our unison affirmation. The words are in your order of service in English and in Spanish. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia. Y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. Good morning. And welcome to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We often take a moment to clarify that we wish to welcome all different kinds of people, people of all different experiences and backgrounds and beliefs. And I think you will get that sense, I hope, from today's service, because it is all about radical inclusion. In fact, it's about preemptive radical inclusion, so that we can work to truly make this a home for people of many experiences and identities and beliefs. To that end, we have a special guest with us this morning. C.B. Beale is a religious educator and consultant and preemptive radical inclusion evangelist who comes to us from Western Mass. They will be leading worship this morning and also leading a workshop after worship that's for absolutely everyone in the congregation. There will be lunch, there will be childcare, so please come and learn more. The service will be the beginning, and the workshop will take us deeper into how we can practice what we're going to learn about. So I really invite you to come to that. And that is going to do us for announcements this morning, because what I really want to do now is invite up Needy Siriram and Jerry Ross to tell us a little about the climate strike and the UN upcoming climate-focused conference.
Last Friday, a group from church went on the youth climate strike in Boston and Lexington. Thousands of people turned up to advocate for the importance of climate justice, including myself. I saw kids from all different parts of Massachusetts coming together for the rally, not going to class to show their dedication to the cause. There were hundreds of signs reading, "I'm with Mother Nature, there is no planet B, and this is my future you're ruining," and more. The speakers, ranging from the ages 10 to 50, highlighted the failures of the past and the importance of the present, of action now, in order to secure a better future. I was inspired by Gina McCarthy, Jeremy Ornstein, and Michelle Wu, and I even shook hands with Senator Ed Markey. After the rally, we marched to the State House. It was 80 degrees, and we had already been standing outside for hours, and I was at risk of heat stroke in my stiff black jeans, but the energy of the crowd never died down. There was an immediate sense of community. It didn't matter who started a chant. Everyone in the vicinity would shout along, all our voices resonating together in the streets. We marched, danced, and chanted our way to the State House with a united purpose: to demonstrate the importance of climate justice and emphasize our resolve, that we would not stop until this issue was addressed, that we wouldn't let our generations and the following generations' future be robbed by those who cared more about profit than people, that our voices would be heard. I personally went inside the State House. We made a ruckus calling for Governor Baker to acknowledge the climate crisis. The whole building must have shook as it heard our cries of, "What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now."
Thank you, Needy. Thank you, Needy. So the folks from First Parish that went to Boston were among approximately 4 million people worldwide who participated in 800 to 1,000 marches. Now, how did this come about? In part, it came about through the activism of a 16-year-old Swedish youth, Greta Thunberg. Now, Greta came to New York at the invitation of Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now, one of the jobs of the United Nations office envoy at a congregation is to periodically remind you that there is a United Nations and what it does. And this is one of the things that it does. You know, it's the only place that we have that convenes the world's nations. And maybe if we survive this climate crisis in the next 11 years or 35 years, the silver lining is that the world's nations will have come together to address a common cause. There was an article in the New York Times this morning by Al Gore. You remember him. He said, there's still time. The other thing I want to say is that the leadership taken by these young people, as extraordinary as it is and as grateful as we need to be for it, does not mean it's their problem. It is our problem. We are in this together. The effects of climate change are happening today. They are changing the world of our lifetime, and we have a responsibility. So my message to you is, if you have time this week, please pay attention to the United Nations Climate Conference tomorrow, where about 60 nations who have committed to taking action on climate change will report to the world what they are doing. Our nation will be barely represented, but our states will be represented. We have a United States for climate change, I think something like that, where 1/2 of our states are represented, and they are committed to the Paris Climate Conference, which, by the way, we haven't officially left. It takes part of the writing of the agreement was that you have to stay in it for 4 years. We won't officially leave it until the day after the 2020 election, so we know what we have to do about that.
Look at all you beautiful people. I'm going to tell a story this morning called Spork and Friends. It's from an original story by Kyo McClear that was just about Spork. But I think that the story is actually about lots and lots and lots of different characters. I wonder if one of the children could explain to the adults what is a spork. And if you say to me, I'll just repeat it so everyone can hear. What's a spork? Where? Oh, tell me, what's a spork? Tell the grown-up, and then the grown-up can tell me. It's a spoon and a fork in a kind of fabulous mixture. Now, this is a story about a spork. Spork is the main character in this story. Also in this story are Spork's parents, a mom and a dad, and various other cutlery. Now later in the story, a toddler will appear suddenly upon the scene. Okay? Spork was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both. Spork had two parents who thought that Spork was perfectly sporky, but Spork stuck out. In the kitchen, forks were forks and spoons were spoons. Cutlery customs were followed closely, and mixing was uncommon. Naturally, there were rule breakers, knives who loved chopsticks and tongs who married forks, but such families were unusual. Spork spent most of their time tucked in the bottom corner of the back drawer. You know that drawer, we all have that drawer, the one with the 5 corn-on-the-cob forks, and the 3 plastic straws, and the old can opener that sticks that we keep around for when the good can opener has gone missing. When Spork came out of the drawer to sit on the countertop, the other utensils would say hi and move on, or ignore Spork completely, or ask Spork some remarkably intrusive questions. One day, after the billionth time that Spork was asked, "What are you anyway?" and "Has your body always been like that?" In the zillionth time that Spork was passed over as the table was being set, Spork sighed and thought, it must be easier to just be one thing. And Spork decided to try. Spork thought to start by fixing their head, and Spork got a bowler hat to appear more round, but the Forks thought that Spork was just much too round, and the hat didn't fit right anyway. Then Spork made a paper crown, like those old hamburger place crowns. I'm dating myself, perhaps. Put on a crown to look more forkish, but the spoons thought that Spork was too pointy. Spork wondered if there were any other lonely creatures out there with no matching kind who never got chosen to be at the table. They wondered if there was an egg beater rolling pin, or an ice cream scoop garlic press, or a spatula teapot. But Spork never met them, if there were. At dinner time, Spork perched on the counter and watched while the spoons played pea hockey and carefully, skillfully balanced boiled eggs. Spork sat off to the side while the forks raked fancy patterns in mashed potatoes and twirled noodles around in complicated circles like rhythmic gymnastics. At the end of this and every other meal, Spork looked on while the others enjoyed a fabulous dip in the pool. There were even bubbles and a spongy massage. Spork was there, watching from the counter, and then shuffled back to their drawer. Then one day, a messy thing arrived. This messy thing had obviously never heard of cutlery customs or table manners. It had its way with the spaghetti. It giggled to see peas bounce and spread across the floor in great patterns of escape. No cutlery customs at all. The messy thing smeared and spilled and flung and clumped and dripped without a care. "Wait," said the forks, but the messy thing did not wait. "Stop," said the spoons. But the messy thing did not stop. "Help," said the forks, while the messy thing continued to splatter and slop. "Quick," said the spoons. They didn't know what to do with the messy thing. Now, a fork may be good for poking and picking, and a spoon may be fine for scooping and stirring, but this messy thing with its slurpy and clumpy half-finished food bits needed something else. Something that could do all those sorts of things at once. Something flexible and easy to hold. Something that was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both. The utensils looked around and they saw Spork, and they gasped, and they immediately felt a mixture of excitement and relief and embarrassment. And that is when Spork leapt off the countertop, over the cutlery drawer, and landed on the high chair. The messy thing saw Spork and immediately stopped. Its eyes got big, and it gurgled its curiosity. It grabbed Spork and held Spork motionless in its fist. It bangled Spork up and down and giggled, "Ha! Ha! It's mine now." And that is how Spork finally and happily found their way to the table. And the cutlery, having realized their mistake, immediately had a meeting and voted unanimously to reorganize the kitchen drawers. There was space for Spork and a proper space for the 5 corn on the forks, 3 plastic straws, and the old can opener that sticks. They built new spaces that would properly fit the egg beater rolling pin, the garlic press ice cream scoop, and the spatula teapot. When they did, they found out there was a whole subgroup of forks and spoons that really would prefer to play board games to spending so much time in the pool, and some knives that really wanted to hang out in the garage with the hatchets. It hadn't occurred to them that they were already so many different things at one time. And they left a couple of empty spaces too, spaces that were constructed with flexibility for whomever came next. The table was for all, and so the organization had to be as well. And they all agreed that spork was perfectly sporky. Just a little bit round, just a little bit pointy, just right.
We are going to send off our RE leaders and our children to their classes, and we are also going to be singing hymn number 1012. That's in your teal booklet, your other hymnal, When I Am Frightened.
After I read this piece by Rebecca Ann Parker, I will invite you into a moment of quiet. In the midst of a world marked by tragedy and beauty, there must be those who bear witness against unnecessary destruction and who, with faith, rise and lead in freedom, with grace and power. There must be those who speak honestly and do not avoid perceiving what must be noticed with sorrow and outrage, or tenderness and wonder. There must be those whose grief troubles the water while their voices sing and speak refreshed worlds. There must be those whose exuberance rises with lovely energy that articulates earth's joys. There must be those who are restless for respectful and loving companionship among human beings, whose presence invites people to be themselves without fear. There must be those who gather with the congregation of remembrance and compassion, draw water from old wells, and walk the simple path of love for neighbor. And there must be communities of people who seek to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly, who call on the strength of soul force to heal, transform, and bless life. There must be religious witness.
So for the last 10 days or so, one of our young people, Nathan Linden, has been trying to track me down. And he came over to find me, and I wasn't in my office, and he came a second time and couldn't find me. And finally, yesterday, he found me, and what he wanted was to sign his name to our membership book. And so this book is out, and should there be others interested in joining this motley crew, this sporkish crew, you are welcome to do so, see me after the service. But I also thought a little bit about what it means to sign your name in a book. Like, when do we sign our names? We sign our names when there's a contract, or we sign our name on a check. We sign our name on our taxes. And it's kind of transactional. You know, we got some services and we pay some money, and it's a, you know, somebody gives and somebody takes, and there you have it. Signing a membership book is actually quite different. It's more of what is called a covenant. It's more about promises we make to each other. And next Sunday, I'll be preaching. It'll be my last opportunity to preach before I go on sabbatical for 3 months. And I want to talk in part about the covenant that holds us together. What holds us together as a congregation? It's not me. It's not even you. It is what promises we make to one another. And I'm up here to introduce the offering, you might have noticed. And the offering also is not a transaction. It's not, you know, I don't get paid by the word here. What an offering is an expression of covenant. It's an expression of the promises we make to make community work. It has to do with hope, it has to do with generosity, and it has to do with serving higher purpose. And so I introduce our offering and remind us that this is about hope, and it's about higher purpose, and it's about the confidence and trust and promises we make to one another. Freely we have received, freely give. Our offering will now gratefully be received.
Watch the
Good morning. When I was a young person, I was told to mind my P's and Q's when I went out around, people. It was meant that I was to be on my good behavior, polite and respectful. Now, this was challenging for me for two basic reasons. First, I grew up on a small farm and I was socialized around cows. I knew all about cow social behavior, but I was not taught a lot about human social behavior. Secondly, there's never been a great deal of distance between a thought and the words flying out of my mouth. I frequently find out what I think as I am saying it. This was unfortunate. When I went to seminary, I still had not learned much about real basic social graces, like if you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk. Be quiet, watch, learn. However, by that time, I thought I knew so much. This was also unfortunate. It was there that I first experienced someone who told me that they were allergic to gluten. And I asked out loud, and more than once during those early 1990s, gluten? Who's allergic to gluten? I mean, wheat is like a basic staple. People have been eating that for 10,000 years. I said, people aren't allergic to staples. Neither my words nor my face were subtle. And then someone asked us not to wear perfume because they were allergic to fragrance. Same response. How could you be allergic to fragrance? Smell is just like smelling. No one's allergic to smelling. I didn't have enough knowledge then to understand that the smell of something is simply a chemical compound ingested through the nose. If one is sensitive to a chemical, one is just going to be as easily to get it through a nose as if one ate it. I wasn't knowledgeable enough to know that there's 4,000 different chemicals that might be used in fragrances. I didn't have enough knowledge to know better. And, oh my goodness, and I couldn't just believe them. I had to substitute my personal experience of a lack of sensitivity to gluten or perfume for their stated reality. Even as at that time I was a queer person, an anti-racist white person, a rural farm kid who went and got educated far beyond expectations, even as I was a person who was intentionally working on learning and practicing justice and equity, I blew it an awful lot. It is part of my practice, my spiritual practice as an educator, to fail in public. I am my own cautionary tale. But it is a practice to learn without hiding, to practice giving people the opportunity to learn from my mistakes, whether they do or not, but at least to model that we are all always learning. And the way that we do that is by trying and failing and trying again, like toddlers learning to walk, and then sometimes succeeding. This is how humans learn and grow. So in fairness, before I invite you to consider your own lives, I started with a story about mine, because I'm nice like that. In those moments when I assess others to be wrong about their experience, what happens is that I believe what I think. I believe that my personal experience in highly reputable education are enough for me to accurately extrapolate from my own experience of privilege, inclusion, exclusion, marginalization, and oppression in order to understand other people's. The problem is that I thought I could do it through the lens of my own perception and what I already knew. And for a long while, the more educated I became, the more I thought that I could, in fact, trust my own thinking without reflection or check. Now, this is, of course, a central injury that most of us have received from our inherited culture, based as it is on patriarchy and a legal and cultural foundation of white supremacy, that we can know, declare, and decide about other people, their identities, and their needs. Now, to wrap up this story with a pretty bow, I must note that subsequently, and possibly as proof of a deity that exists solely to provide me with awkward learning opportunities, I have become a person with celiac disease who cannot ingest even the microscopic bit of gluten. Oh, but there's more. I am now also a person who becomes ill from petroleum-based scents and perfumes. And, well, I'm allergic to, well, pretty much nature. So I've been both of these things, right? I have been the person whose reality is challenged by someone else whose reality is different, and they refuse to bear witness to my life. And I have been a person who uses my own reality to judge others. Now, I don't know you all or where you come from, but I come from about 300 years of English and Scottish New Englanders, hardscrabble original settlers, immigrants, a couple from the Mayflower, most through New Brunswick. At its core, my family is like Puritans are us. I come from people with names like Harbot Grimscottle. And, hate to tell you, well, I don't hate to tell you because I'm telling you, regardless of your personal cultural heritage, if you are deeply you, it is in our institutional genes. This is, let's go with unfortunate. Puritans weren't big on feelings, or words for feelings, or noticing their feelings, or noticing other people's feelings. When I was a kid, I knew 3 feeling words: sad, mad, and, wait, what was the other one? Oh yeah, mad. I come from generations of people for whom the normal reaction in our cultural bones when someone dies is to say, well, that's too bad, gotta get on with it. Martha, you'll organize the food, right? I come from people for whom grieving is private and internal and set aside as quickly as possible, and empathy, when offered, is quickly shaken off. Sorry your dad died. Yeah, thanks, you know, he was really sick, probably for the best. Hey, I like your hat. And I suggest the heritage of our tradition as inherited, a heritage we struggle against by doing things like joys and concerns. Y'all remember how hard that was to introduce. I can say that in any congregation in this country, how hard it was to introduce joys and concerns. It invites people to have feelings in public. The heritage of our tradition as inherited downplays people's experiences of being a person, of having a body, of having feelings, while at the same time it upplays the idea that we can and should know what is true. Knowing over being, thinking over feeling. I'm not saying anything new here. This is, perhaps begrudgingly, core to who we are. Seek the truth in love claims our common UU affirmation. Our heritage leads us to perceive this invitation as seeking facts of truth and falsity. Our broad Puritan heritage offers an invitation to argue, but be polite about it. When we search, talk, and debate our ideas, we build muscles of debating. And it might develop a kind of connection that comes from striving together with common purpose, belief, and commitment, but no one enters a congregation intending to find people to argue with. In fact, for many of us who are LGBTQ, entering these doors is often an act of bravery, for the last time they were in a church was when they were being kicked out of one. Argument or debate is not what they're looking for in that moment. In talking, striving, and debating about truth and falsity does not create an inclusive welcome or the foundation for meaningful relationship. What creates an inclusive welcome is preparing one. Rilke invites us to love the questions themselves. Loving the questions, the process, the container for exploration and community puts us in a different location relative to one another, and it lets us separate a search from truth from a search for meaning. Different mechanisms are in play. When we work together to create and seek meaning, we put ourselves in a position where we are willing to wait, to wonder, to reflect, to create opportunities to deeply bear witness to one another, to listen to people as they share about their lives and what they hold dear. I want to go back to the story I told this morning. It was Spork who had to make their own way to the table, not on Spork's own terms, but only because the utensils finally noticed that they needed Spork. Our UU faith calls us to do better. Our UU faith calls us that we should make a way. The utensils, more properly, should have looked up at the beginning of the story, seen Spork on the counter, and said, "Hey, Spork, come hang out with us. Tell us about yourself. Let us learn you as deeply as we learn our textbooks." Preemptive radical inclusion, which I promised you I would get to, is the three-word phrase I coined that means something a little bit different than each of those three words separately. Preemptive radical inclusion is a process and a practice by which we who are empowered to have formal or informal leadership within a group, organization, or congregation, who truly want justice and equity for all, that we must be preemptive and radical about how we invite inclusion. PRI means that inclusion is not a goal. Many of us have been taught that if only we could be more inclusive, we would have arrived. I suggest inclusion is a gateway, not a goal. It is a gateway to justice and equity. When we're practicing preemptive radical inclusion, we don't assume that based on what we already know and what we have already experienced, we can extrapolate what others know or have experienced. We don't automatically believe what we think because we recognize that so much of what we think was poison put there by dysfunction of family, culture, religion, educational system, or state. Preemptive radical inclusion also means that every time we say the word we, and I've said it a lot this morning, yeah? We are incredibly mindful and intentional of who we mean. Because if what we mean is those of us who are already here, then our imagination has already been insufficient. Our intention must be that when we speak of who we are together, our we means all of us together. Already, all of us, everyone. When we practice preemptive radical inclusion, we preemptively learn what we need to know to meaningfully invite people to tell their truths and to share their experiences. If we are mindful of being in beloved community with people of genders that are different than ours, then perhaps we take time and make the effort to participate in the webinar series, Transgender Inclusion in Congregations, just saying. Coming soon to a space near you. I don't know what space or what day, but it's coming. Look in your thing, it's probably written. If we are mindful of being in beloved community with people of all races, we might choose to join in using the study guide that UUA just put out on Conversations for Liberation. This preemptively increases our capacity to be appropriately welcoming, to be inclusive not only in invitation, but in engagement. Preemptive radical inclusion is a practice which means that those of us who are physically, currently in this room, accept our responsibility to assume that everyone is already among us. It is our responsibility to make space in the drawers in the kitchen before those new utensils show up. It is our responsibility to read and listen and learn beyond our areas of experience or expertise, and to understand that everyone is an expert in their own experience. It's our responsibility to learn out loud, to make errors, to apologize, and to repair them. Donna Markova pointed out that when she wrote, "I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire." It is our responsibility, it is our call to assume that everyone is already among us, to prepare ourselves to welcome and include and participate and change in this ever increasingly broad way, and to know that in the process we may cause harm, but to not disengage because of that fear of falling or catching fire. To recognize that that is part of how people learn and grow. It's our responsibility to be present with what it means for our blessings and our joys and our challenges and our mistakes. Now, were the practice of preemptive radical inclusion part of how I perceived the world when I was in seminary, and someone said to me they were allergic to something I'd never heard of, I would say, I've not heard of that. Can you tell me more? What do I need to know about that in order to support your presence here among us? I could have chosen to believe them about their experience without filtering it first through my own. I needed to make space for the likelihood that I did not know about them. Now, this brief time here today is just an introduction to this one very particular way of thinking about something that is both simple and incredibly complex. Simple idea, complex in how it might work in our everyday lives. Not believing everything we think is really hard. I like being right. Maybe nobody else likes being right, but I really like being right. And so this is a challenging practice to question the lenses through which we assess others. Human brains categorize. It's part of how we work. It is a natural process. And because we are not other animals, we have a prefrontal cortex that lets us notice when we categorize and decide what value or accuracy that has. In our story today, there is a reality that Spork had no reason to trust the other utensils, even when they said, "Yay," and threw confetti. And this wasn't simply because they ignored Spork, but also because they did not know or seem to care to know about Spork's life. They did not know or care to make space for Spork, for what Spork was like or what they needed or what they cared about. Spork had no feeling, no affective connection of care or welcome with the other utensils. I want to believe that in rearranging the kitchen drawers, they spoke with Spork, and they learned about Spork's life, and they reached out beyond Spork to learn about the experiences and lives of others who were like Spork. That they didn't make Spork explain everything to them themselves, but that they took that as an opportunity to move forward in the world and to figure out, what else do I need to know to be present with Spork and others who are like Spork? I want to believe that they did not just perceive that this was a problem that could be fixed by changing a physical structure, or that the problem was gender, or that they would decide on their own that the problem was simply the physical plant. They needed to do those things. They needed to notice those things. But that was not the end of the work. That was the beginning of the work. I want to believe that they connected with spork in a way that meant that later on they would not ignore spork in another situation. That they would change the way they thought, and they would modify the lens through which they perceived these kinds of interactions. I want to believe that they came to know spork deeply and became in a trusting relationship, that they bore witness to spork's sharing of spork's life, that they believed less of what they had always been taught about utensils and would question their initial thoughts when other different utensils joined them. And in this happy ending, spork could learn to trust them because they made themselves trustworthy. I want to believe that the utensils' inclusion of others meant that the utensils themselves changed. That the beloved community, to mix my children's stories, had a heart that grew 2 sizes bigger. When we all share and talk about things that are meaningful to us, our perspective and our experience, and then we find that that perspective and experience is received and held and acknowledged and believed, then we find people trustworthy. When we all preemptively create and hold space for everyone to tell their truth and bear witness to all of the beautiful, complicated messiness of our multiple identities and relationship, well, that is a really radical position. And I want to suggest that it is the radical position that our next hymn invites us to. We would be one in building for tomorrow, a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one, we pledge ourselves to greater service. With love and justice, strive to make us free. Please rise in body or spirit and sing these words, not just as a desire, but as a promise. Closing words today are a brief story. There was a woman who had a pair of well-worn leather gloves. She'd had them for over a decade, and they fit her hand perfectly, soft and supple. One day on the subway, she was leaving, and one fell behind her on the floor. A young man reached and picked it up and started to go toward the door to give it back to her as she reached toward it. But the doors were closing, and he went, "Ah!" And in a flash, she threw the glove she had into the car. Go and do likewise.